Welcome back everyone. Hi, if you're new, my name is Tori and today I am going to share with you a brief guide to the post-apocalyptic genre. I feel like this video has been a long time coming. I have mentioned so many times over the years on my channel that I love post-apocalyptic books. And at this point, I love the genre so much, it's pretty rare that I actually come across a post-apocalyptic book that I don't like. So like I mentioned, I have talked about all of these books at one point or another across my channel, but it's time to just put them all in one place, one video for you all to reference or people to reference who might stumble upon it, and I hope it is helpful. So I am going to break this video up into 3 different parts. So the first part I'm going to talk about zombie novels and vampires, and then in the second I have like environmental disasters and flus and nuclear war, and then in the last category I want to talk about modern classics. This is definitely not like the end-all be-all of post-apocalyptic recommendations. I still have so many that I want to get to. Most notably, I want to read Swan Song by Robert McCammon, Blindness by Jose Saramago, and Alas Babylon by Pat Frank. I want to read The End of the World Running Club by Adrian J. Walker. So there are still so many that I want to get to. So nobody comment and be like, you forgot this one. It's probably just because I haven't read it. So I'm going to share with you all the ones that I have read and loved, and I hope this is helpful if if you're new to post-apocalyptic books and don't know where to start, or if you have read a couple and you just really don't know where to go next, you can hopefully find something here and just hear me gush about all the ones that I like. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Let's get started. So the first category I mentioned was zombies and other creatures. And by other creatures, I mean like basically vampires. So I feel like this category is one that I've definitely been reading from a lot lately. So I do have several that I want to talk about. And I'm not going to go into too much detail about every single book. I'm just going to kind of give you like an overview. So the first one I want to talk about is a big one, and that is The Walking Dead Compendium 1. And so this contains issues 1 through 48 of The Walking Dead. And I've also mentioned on my channel like 1,000 times at this point that I am a massive fan of The Walking Dead TV show. It is my favorite TV show of all time. I watch it all the time. And so just being a fan of the TV show over the years though, I was always aware of the comic book series, and when the show would be in between seasons, it was always fun to get online and see what the comic book fans were saying about, the direction of the story, which enemies we were going to meet next. So I felt very like in tune with the storylines of the comic books and like what was on the horizon for the TV show. But just as a fan of the show, finally going back and experiencing the comic books for the first time has just been, it's been so much fun. So I actually started this compendium a couple of years ago, and I've just slowly been making my way through this first edition of it. And so I do want to continue on with it, but I've just been having such an amazing time reading this. So I do think if you are a fan of The Walking Dead TV show but have never read the comic books, just go for it. It's just really fun to pick up on the key differences between the comics and the TV show. For example, I already knew this going into the comic books, being a fan of the TV show. I already knew that Daryl was not in the comic books, but it does not make it hurt any less. And then next I want to talk about 2 that I think are still so underrated, but I think they are getting a little bit more traction. But that's the Until the End of the World series by Sarah Lyons Fleming, and then also Mordacious. So these books are the first books in their respective trilogies, and they both take place in the same world but follow different, different groups of characters. So in both of them, the whole premise is the zombie apocalypse happens. People are trying to figure out what to do, how to survive, that sort of thing. It's a very, very human story, and just following groups of characters as they just try to stay safe and rebuild, and relationships develop, that sort of thing. So in the first one, we're following a group of friends who are at work when the apocalypse happens. One of our main characters in this has grown up just kind of preparing for this moment. So she's very ready for the apocalypse and like zombies and everything. And so basically her friends just really latch on to her and they try to survive. I love the relationships that develop throughout this story, and it does get really, it does get really sad the more you keep reading and things start happening and you lose people. It's really good. And so Mordacious, as I mentioned, it takes place in the same universe as Until the End of the World, but we're following a different set of characters pretty much during the same time frame. We're following them when the world falls apart, and then I think they go to this farm or something and they try to rebuild from there. So they're both just really worth reading. I finished this entire trilogy, Until the End of the World, and then I've only finished the first 2 books in this second series, which is the City series, but highly recommend them both. The next 2 I want to talk about are also now favorites of mine, and that is The Passage by Justin Cronin, which is the first in the trilogy, and then also The Girl with All the Gifts by M.R. Carey, and this is the first, I think, in a duology. I don't have any plans to read the sequel, but I did love the first book, so I'll start with The Passage first. This is a vampire story, so I think if that sounds interesting to you, definitely pick it up. But I love the way that Justin Cronin just handles this entire story. It never feels over the top, it never feels cheesy, and the storyline in this book, it just takes a really dramatic shift in the second half. So in the first half, we're getting this look, you know, at how this virus is being used on these inmates, and just basically how that is changing them into creatures that we know as vampires. And so we're also following the storyline of this girl Amy, who shows some immunity to this virus that has been going around. But in the second half of this book, we're following a group of survivors, you know, well into the future, who are now living together and just trying to keep, you know, each other safe. I love the way this story is told. Justin Cronin is playing around with a lot of different like structure types and different formats throughout the story. We have like interview formats, the typical prose that you see, emails, that sort of thing. I read this book a couple of years ago and just really still can't believe how much I fell in love with this when I read it. So I do need to continue with the series, but overall I really love this and just highly, highly recommend. And then the next one I want to talk about is The Girl with All the Gifts by M.R. Carey, and I love this book so much. It's so funny to look back on my reading experience with this book and how I feel about it now, because when I finished it, I thought it was good and I liked it, but it's like the more I keep talking about this book, the more I'm just like, wow, like that was amazing. This book is incredible. So I mean, I can't recommend this one enough. This is also a zombie apocalyptic novel, but in this we're following a group of scientists, military personnel, but we're also following this young hungry or young zombie Melanie, who is just so sweet and curious about everything, and she develops a really close relationship with her teacher once everything falls apart. And so as the story unfolds, we're really following their relationship, and we're just really seeing, you know, for Melanie to be this creature, this monster, she is just so kind-hearted and so pure in a lot of ways, and just watching her relationship unfold with her teacher is, I love this book. I love it. I can talk about The Girl with All the Gifts forever. This is just honestly one of my favorites. So I do, if you don't pick up anything else from the zombie stack, I highly, highly recommend The Girl with All the Gifts. And then the last book that I have in the zombie category is a more recent read for me. I read this last year, like it was so long ago. I read this last year and I really enjoyed this. This is Feed by Mira Grant, and this is the first book in the Newsflesh trilogy. This is another one that I think just does something so just unique and just really fun with the typical zombie subgenre and the, you know, the zombie tropes that we tend to find in these books. This doesn't even feel like a zombie novel in a lot of ways. At its core, this is a chronicling of a presidential campaign. We're following these siblings who run a blog site, and it's just like, it just so happens in the background of this world that there are zombies roaming around, and you still have to be careful like where you go. But the whole novel really is about this presidential campaign that they're following. But the backstory of Feed is what I think makes it so interesting. We have people who were trying to find a cure for a lot of different illnesses, but in doing that, they just created something just completely deadly, and that led to the world that we have now in this book. So I did really enjoy this. The character personalities in this are really strong, and I think this is another one that should be added to your list if you haven't read it already. So the next category I want to move into is the category I really didn't know what to do with. So it's a little bit of everything in here. It's environmental, it's flus, it's nuclear war, it's, consider this just a free-for-all category. So I have 5 books that I want to talk about in this category, and the first is none other than City of Savages. I know if you guys watch my channel a lot, you are probably sick of me talking about this book. This might be the last time you hear about it for a while, so I'm just gonna throw it in this video, but I love this story so much. I mention this all the time. I don't think this story is gonna work for everybody. It can feel a little cheesy, a little angsty, but at its core, I love the sister relationships in here. I love the relationship that the girls have with their mother, and it's all unfolding in the backdrop of this really bleak and cold post-apocalyptic Manhattan setting. So I think if a book with just a small cast of characters interests you and you want to follow that journey, I would just highly recommend this. I love this book so much. I really want to reread this one day, but this was amazing. So I highly recommend this. And the book is told in the 2 sisters' different POVs. So they're really good. And I thought they were pretty distinct too, which is, for me, that's a must in POV, in different POV books. And then next I have another one that I really love, and I think this trilogy is so underrated. This is the Road to Nowhere trilogy by Meg Ellison. Book 1 is the Book of the Unnamed Midwife. Book 2 is the Book of Edda, and then book 3 is the Book of Flora. And I have finished this trilogy, highly recommend it. The first one is definitely my favorite of the trilogy, but books 2 and 3 are just, I mean, they're still amazing. So I highly recommend the entire trilogy, but I love book 1 so much. This is another just really dark and bleak and really honestly hard to read book in some places. So in this we have this virus that's spread, and the illness has targeted women, and so it wipes out the majority of women in the world, and the women who are left in the world, it makes it impossible for them to give birth. And so the world just becomes ruled by men. It becomes incredibly dangerous for the women who are still left and walking along the road. And so we have this woman though who was trained as a midwife before the world fell apart, and she quite literally wakes up in this post-apocalyptic world and has to just kind of learn how to adjust and try to learn how to fend for herself. So she walks these just lonely and cold roads, and she finds these young girls who are still left and being sold and traded, and it's just, this book is really dark. So I mean, I highly recommend it. I love the story, but I just really recommend it with caution. But I think if you are interested in it, definitely pick it up. The next book I want to talk about is another environmental disaster book, Nuclear War, but I do want to preface this one by saying Metro 2033 is the only book on this list that I have not finished, but I feel like I can cheat and talk about it and recommend it in this video because I am very familiar with the Metro video games and I love them. So I feel like that's my gold pass to talk about Metro 2033. But I mean, Metro 2033, this takes place in Moscow, and nuclear war has just basically ruined everything. And so our survivors though, they have been living underground in the Metro train station, and they've essentially formed these different communities along the different lines of the train station. So we're following this young man, Artyom, who really becomes, like, in a lot of ways the saving grace for his train stop, if you want to call it a train stop, or his community on the train line. And so it really, their survival becomes up to him and his crew. So I can't keep saying I love the book because I don't love the book because I haven't finished it, but I love the video game. So I know they are pretty similar. So the one thing that I do love about the Metro games though is that they are just so atmospheric. So I think if you are looking for that just cold and dark and just really bleak post-apocalyptic landscape, you'll definitely find it in a book or a game like Metro 2033. And then the next book I want to talk about is Elysium by Jennifer Marie Brissett. This is also something I would classify as like environmental disaster, but it's done in such a unique way. I've never read a structure like this before. We're following a couple in the city, and it's like they're trying to find ways to rekindle their relationship in a lot of ways. They're just falling in love, out of love, and every time something significant or a turning point happens in this couple's relationship, it's almost like the city rearranges itself, and then we're following the couple in like in different bodies, and they're completely different people. At the core of the story, it is about this couple and this relationship that just keeps breaking apart and mending, and people finding their way back to each other. But you know, overall we do have this really unique setting of this environment that is constantly changing and being forced to change. So I think if that interests you and you are looking for an underrated book, definitely check this one out. And then the last one that I want to talk about in this environmental disaster sort of category is Who Fears Death by Nnedi Okorafor. I do want to preface this by saying this first book does not actually feel very post-apocalyptic, but the setting and the world that this character traverses is, you know, it is very much post-apocalyptic, but while you're reading it, it doesn't feel like that, because this is just, we're following this character who is really just coming of age and trying to find herself in this bleak world. So that's more so the focus of the story, but I have heard the other book in this series does have that more post-apocalyptic feel, if that interests you. But in this one, we do have this post-apocalyptic landscape and these warring tribes, and one of them invades this village and just demolishes the entire village, and this tribe also assaults the women of this village. And so our main character is a product of that assault. Her complexion is a lot lighter, and she's pointed out for being noticeably different, and just growing up in that world does have a significant impact on her development and the friend group that she falls into. And so I mean, the whole story, we are just really following this girl who is trying to find her way. So it does feel like a coming of age story in a lot of ways, but a coming of age story against a really dark post-apocalyptic landscape. The last category that I want to talk about are classics or modern classics, and these are books that I think will stand the test of time and that we'll continue to be talking about in relation to the post-apocalyptic genre for a very, very long time. The first two, none other than The Stand by Stephen King and The Road by Cormac McCarthy. The Road just had such a visceral impact on me while I was reading it. I still feel a little scarred from reading this book. It is just honestly the darkest thing I've ever read. The way that this is written, Cormac McCarthy just immerses you fully in the story, and you feel like you've been on this road with this father and son forever, and just following their journey, it really gets to you after a while, and by the time you close the book you actually feel sick. So but I do think The Road is one that has really just been standing the test of time so far and will continue to do so. It's an incredible book. I highly recommend. And then of course it would not be a post-apocalyptic video without The Stand by Stephen King. I think honestly this is just the most well-known, not only Stephen King novel of all time, but also the most well-known post-apocalyptic novel of all time. This is an epic story, and this is one that I do really want to revisit one day, because I read The Stand when I was not really young, but like a little too young to appreciate it now. I went through a very random Stephen King phase in high school, but I would love to reread The Stand now and get that new perspective that I obviously didn't have when I was like 15, 16 years old. At its core, I think The Stand is an epic story of just good and evil. This flu wipes out the entire population, and we have these people coming together, but within that there become so many divisions, and some people in the group, I remember Flag, I don't know why that name stands out, I think it was like Randall, and we have individuals in that group who begin to, you know, rise up in power and begin to take advantage of people. This is such an epic cast of characters, and I think Stephen King just really, in my opinion, I think this is his magnum opus. He just really gets into the nitty-gritty of being left in this just strange group of people at the end of the world, and how people with these really dark and dangerous and manipulative personalities begin to take control and rise up. So I love that. I love seeing the breakdown of this group over the course of the story. So you can't recommend a post-apocalyptic book, I think, and leave out The Stand. So that is definitely a must read. The next one that I want to talk about is Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. I think some of you watching this video might be thinking, oh, it's a little too early to say that Station 11 is going to become a classic. I really do think though Station 11 is going to become a modern, I think it already is a modern classic of the post-apocalyptic genre. This is such a quiet post-apocalyptic story and one of my all-time favorites. So I have not watched the TV show yet. That is coming, but I do want to watch the show. But I remember this book so well, and just kind of bouncing back and forth between past and present, when, you know, when the world fell apart and people are now trying to make their way. It's so good. And again, I think it's just such a quiet story with extremely memorable characters. I think this one, more so than the other books that I've recommended in this video so far, I remember Station 11 just really makes you reflect on the things that are important in your life. And it just, once you finish it, the book really confronts like the way that we spend our time, the way that we value our time, and the people in our life, and the things that we consider important, and what happens basically when all of that just crumbles. Like, what are you going to do? I love Station 11. I think this is just one that is just going to keep being brought up, keep being talked about, and so just if you haven't read it yet, I do highly recommend this one. The next one I want to talk about is also one where it might be too early to call it a classic, but I'm gonna do it anyway because I feel like it is. We're already on our way there. That is The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin, and really the entire Broken Earth trilogy. The Fifth Season and just the Broken Earth trilogy as a whole is unlike anything you will ever read. I promise. I promise you will never read anything like this. It's just, it blows my mind that someone can even write something like this. It is just, the fifth season is honestly incredible. It takes place in this world that is used to the world always ending. All these catastrophes and environmental disasters. It's just another Tuesday for these people. But you also have these people called Origines who are able to control the movements of the earth and like really tap into it, and they can almost like get a sense of these disasters and control them in certain ways. And the whole thing is just, it's amazing. So in this we are following some different perspectives, and as the book goes on they start tying together in just honestly the best ways. So I mean, you cannot go wrong with the fifth season or the entire Broken Earth trilogy. It's just one of my favorite things of all time. N.K. Jemisin's one of my favorite authors of all time, just from writing this alone. I've read other works by N.K. Jemisin that I haven't loved as much, but she's still just an all-time favorite simply because of the fifth season. I think if you are looking for something epic, something you've never read before, and you have been sitting on the fifth season for a long time, you need to read this. And then the last one that I want to include in the modern classics section is none other than Parable of the Sower by Octavia E. Butler. This is also one of my favorites. I love Octavia Butler's work so much, and this just has left such a massive impact on me. I guess I didn't realize this until I read Parable of the Sower, but I really love when religious themes are blended into the apocalypse. It's something about it, whether that takes the place of like cults in a post-apocalyptic or whether people are struggling with their religion in the apocalypse. I feel like that is just such a fascinating thing to explore in a setting like a post-apocalyptic environment. We're following this character, Lauren, who has the gift of hyper empathy, and she is just so aware of everything that is going on in her community. So the world in Parable of the Sower, it's been completely devastated by environmental collapse, and economic collapse had a lot to do with it too, but it's mostly a world that has been damaged by environmental disasters. And so our main character, Lauren, is telling her story through a series of journal entries, and her father's a religious man. And so through her journal entries though, Lauren is just, you know, telling us about her world, but in the process of that, she's still grappling with her faith and just where does she stand in relation to her father's beliefs and the things that she sees happening in the world. So she gets really deep into that, and through the process of it, she begins to develop her own beliefs and her own faith essentially. And we get that through the entire book. And as the story progresses, Lauren realizes that she could be a person worth following. I'll leave it at that. So those are all of my recommendations, you guys, for this video. Like I mentioned, there are still so many post-apocalyptic books that I do want to get to in the future that are just sitting on my TBR, so that is coming soon. But I hope this was helpful. I hope this gives you a good place to start, and I hope you do find some new favorites in this stack and you end up loving the genre as much as I do. So thank you guys so much for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.